Hi, in this video we'll be looking at how to use lookups, value lists, and mandatory filters in a data model to assist with report building. For this exercise, I've done a cut-down data model that just has two tables. One is accounts and the other is ledger transactions. At this stage, I haven't defined any lookups and just have the raw columns. Let's have a look at Query Builder and the accounts table. You can see currently there are no mandatory filters for accounts, and I have to drag up the columns into the filter area. Let's have a look at the lookup. Currently the lookup's set to automatic, so it's going to do its own logic. By default, it's going to do a select distinct from the table. So if you have a look at debug, you can see here that it's gone to the accounts table and it's taken out the first two columns. What we'd like to do for this lookup is change it so that we get the account code, description, and account type. Let's go back to Studio and change this behavior. Select the accounts table and come to the account code. First of all, we'd like to make this mandatory. So we come down to the filters area and you can see that there's mandatory values. We'll change this to always. Next, come to the lookup property. You can see currently it's set to auto. Let's change this to field list. This will allow us to select the columns that will appear when we select the lookup for account code. So currently we have account code selected. Next I'll select description and then finally the account type. Let's save this, and this time when we reopen the accounts table and filter on the account code, you'll see that it's coming up as red, which means it's a mandatory filter. And also if we go to lookup, now we have three columns. You'll notice that the account type is currently a number. So if I was to take the account type up into the filter area and look at the list, we'd like to change this account type. So instead of showing 1, 2, and 3, it will show the correct label for the number. To do this, we need to use value lists. Select the account type column. This time, instead of using the lookup, come down to validation method. Currently it's set to auto, and from the methods drop-down list, select value list. This will allow us to define what each value is, and you can see that it's produced a template. The first line is the code. For example, if we had a creditor, we'd put in the letter C, which is an abbreviation, and then we'd have the full description come in here. The where section of the value list defines how the column is going to be filtered. Currently there's a keyword which is field SQL name, so that'll be the account type in this scenario, and then you can place in what the where clause should be, for example, for a creditor. So we could say it's equal to 1. We can also do logic where we do or statements or and statements on any number of columns. So you can manufacture your own specific where clauses as well. For this example, I've already prepared a list of known values for the account types. Just paste those in and let's have a look at this list. The first item is defined as all. This is so that we can select all the account types. And notice that it uses the special keyword all in triangular brackets. And then we have the description. The second item is P for profit and loss. So we have our short code and then we have our user-friendly label. And then under that we have the where clause. So it'll take whatever the current column is, which is account type, and it should equal number 3. And then the next entry is for the balance sheet, etc. If I come to the bottom of this list, you can see that I've also manufactured some special cases. For example, exclude MIMO accounts. Exclude MIMO accounts are any value that's not 5. So we have simple scenarios here where we're looking for any value that's 5, but we can also do exclude 5 and even in clauses as well. Now we've defined our validation method. We just need to confirm the data type, because the original data type was a number. You can see the hash key here on the account type. So we just need to come up now to the data type. Going forward now, it's no longer going to be an integer but a string. Let's save this and have a look and see what the account types show now. I've reopened Query Builder, and if we have a look at the account code lookup, you can see now the numbers have been turned into user-friendly descriptions. And if I pull up the account type into the filter area, that's also showing the user-friendly description and the short codes. And if I pull out the account type into the outputs along with the account code, you'll see that we get an error on the account type. This is because the account type is now a value list. Value lists have a very strict filtering validation. They cannot be left blank. And you'll see now that it's insisting that the account code be set. This is because we've set this as mandatory as well. The idea behind mandatory filters is to force the user to enter a value. This is important when later on we're looking at something like a transactional table, where there could be millions of rows in the database. And by forcing the user to filter on, say, the primary keys, we can avoid them pulling back all the data. So I'll need to set the account code as well. And if we preview the data, here's our account type and our account code. And if we have a look at the raw SQL, you can see that that value list has been turned into a case statement where we have the number and the description that we provided earlier. Next, I'd like to change the way these lookups work so that I can set the account type, for example, creditor, and when I come to the account code lookup, I'd like it to just show the creditors because we've selected the account type creditor just above. To do this, let's put the account type just above the account code to show the priority in which they're entered. Next, I'll make the account type mandatory, like we did with the account code. Then, come back into the account code lookup. You can see the account code lookup was defined as a field list. In addition to this setting, let's use the Use Mandatory Filters to restrict the lookup. Let's save this and view the results in Query Builder again. You can see now that account type and account code are both set in a red background. And if I set the account type to creditor and then come down to the account code, now you'll see that it's restricted to just creditor. And if we have a look at the SQL statement, you can see in the where clause we have account type equals 1. The value list is helping with this mapping. Next, let's go to the GL Ledger Transactions table and have a look at the account code that's on this table. If I take it up into the filter area and do a filter, you can see it has different behavior to what we just defined before. This is because by default, when filtering, it'll take the column name and do a select distinct from the table. In this case, we would really like to override this behavior to get the complete list of accounts from the chart of accounts table, not the ledger. For this, we'll need to use inherit lookup. Come back to Studio and go to the transactions table and select the account code that's on that table. Because we're on a transactional table, we'd like to force the user to enter the account code, or at least think about it before running a report. So let's set this to mandatory. Then come up to the lookup, and instead of selecting field list this time, let's select inheritance. The next step is to choose the table from where you want to inherit the lookup. In this case, it's GL accounts. The next step is to choose the column in which you wish to inherit the lookup from, which is account code. I'm going to save this and we'll go back to transactions and view the results. You can now see that there's a mandatory filter on account code on the transactions table. And if we go to the lookup, this time it's not a select distinct from the ledger table, but it's coming from the accounts table. So we have a complete list of all the accounts, irrespective of there being a transaction or not. Also, the lookup will appear a lot quicker than doing a select distinct from the transaction table, because we're going to a smaller table. It's possible to filter on any item in this table, for example, the amount. I could say where the amount is greater than 0, for example. But if I clicked on the lookup, it's going to do a select distinct from the ledger, and these are all the unique values. This lookup may take quite some time to do, and it really doesn't make much sense to get the unique values from the ledger. For this reason, I'd like to disable the lookup on the amount. To disable a lookup, come to the amount, go to the filter section and select lookup and select from the list none. The ledger has a column called transaction date, and it really doesn't have a time, so I'd like to strip off the time part and have the lookup just show the date. So for this scenario, I'm going to come up to the data type, and you can see the raw data type is date time, and if I change the data type to be just date, it's going to strip off the time portion. Next, let's explore how we can set default filter values. For example, if we filtered on the transaction date, we'd like to default it to just the last month, for example. You can see here I'm setting an offset, so it just does the last month's values. In the data model, come down to the filter section again, and you can see that there are default values from and to. I'm going to set these to date, which will be whatever the date is on the day, and then -3 months. And for the to date, I'm going to set it to date, which will be today's date. I'll do likewise with the account code. For example, by default, I'd like the account code to default to all. Next, I'd like to explore periods. You can see that in this data model, we have a period, which is some sort of year and a month on the end, or it could be weeks, any sort of number system. Currently, the period's defined as a number, so if we did a filter on it, it would just show a unique list of all the numbers. You can see it has year and then 3 digits for the period. Let's have a look at turning this into a real period. What we need to do is come in to the length and decide how long the actual data type is. It doesn't matter if it's a char or integer. The length will determine how the engine handles it. So in this case, it's 4 digits for the year and 3 for the period. So the overall length is 7. Next, we come up to the data type and set the data type to period. You can see now that the icon is changed to P. We'd also like to set this as a mandatory filter, and we're going to set the default value for the filters to be the current period. We can do offsets just like we did with the date, for example, -3 periods or -1 year. But default them to the current period and avoid hitting all the transactions in the table. You can see now that when I come into the transactions table, there are 2 mandatory filters, one is on the account and one's on the period. And by default, it's going to the current period. You can see here it's selected the year and the current month. It is possible to define the current period logic within the data model in case it's not a calendar period. Let's have a look at the period lookup now. You can see that the engine's detected it as a correct period, and we can set offsets and do quarter logic as well. And if we output the period, the account code and the amount, you can see the periods are correctly formatted. Next, I'd like to show how we can bring fields up into the root table. You can see here that we've got a account code, and to get the account name, we need to come down into the chart of accounts table and select the description. Let's pull this description up so it appears in the main list. In data models, these are called field joins, because when the field is accessed, it actually kicks in the join to that particular table. I'm just going to rearrange some of these columns. Put the period up the top, and then come into the chart of accounts table, and here we have the description. I'm just going to move that up to near to the account code, and I'm going to right click on it and select copy, and then we'll come back to the transactions table. And if I go paste, you can see that I'm prompted to say if we paste this particular column into the transactions table, it's going to require the join. So we say yes. Notice that the color is a green color. This is just to denote that it's really coming from this table here. Next, I'd like to discuss some more advanced techniques like passing parameters into lookups. Up here in the top hand corner, you can see that we can have parameters. If we have a look at the tooltip, you'll see that there's some syntax that we can provide on the target table. So if I was to pass a parameter in, put some value here, which could even be a state value, and then on the chart of accounts table, to use that, I'd most likely come to the where clause, for example, and I'll just use a template from the control tag list. and select Lookup. And you can see here that if it's in lookup mode, we can inject a where clause. For example, a category column on this table could be set to that parameter that we just set earlier. In summary, lookups assist users in selecting filter values, and mandatory filters allow you to force users to think about filtering criteria so that they don't hit the whole table. And value lists allow you to transform raw numbers into more meaningful descriptions.